Flight attendant Kimberly Watson forcefully escorts 17-year-old Jasmine Franklin from first class, humiliating her before all passengers. Jasmine protests showing her legitimate ticket. Kimberly insists people like her don't belong in first class. Jasmine texts someone while being dragged away. Airport security approaches. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? If this has already caught your attention, hit that like button and subscribe to see how this outrageous situation unfolds. Can you believe what happened next when Jasmine's mother arrived? Let's continue. The day had started with so much promise for Jasmine Franklin. The brilliant 17-year-old high school senior had awoken early, double-checking her presentation materials for the prestigious National Youth Science Competition in San Francisco. Her acceptance to Harvard on a full scholarship just 2 weeks prior still felt surreal, but today was about showcasing the revolutionary AI algorithm she developed that could predict climate change impacts on vulnerable communities with unprecedented accuracy. "You've got everything?" her mother, Alicia Franklin, asked as they pulled up to the departures terminal at Atlanta International Airport. Jasmine nodded, patting her carry-on bag containing her laptop and research materials. "I wish you could come with me," Jasmine said, a flutter of nervousness in her stomach at the thought of flying alone to such an important event. Alicia squeezed her daughter's hand. "You know I would if I could, baby. This emergency board meeting came up last minute, and as CEO, I can't reschedule. But I'll be there tomorrow for your presentation, I promise." What neither of them mentioned was how Alicia Franklin had built Franklin Technologies from a small startup to a multi-billion-dollar tech enterprise over the past 15 years. Her company's innovative cloud security solutions had revolutionized data protection, making her one of the few black female CEOs of a Fortune 500 company. Despite their wealth and success, Alicia had raised Jasmine to remain humble and grounded. "It's better that people judge you for your mind and character than your family's money," Alicia had always told her. So Jasmine rarely mentioned her mother's position, preferring to earn respect through her own accomplishments. After a quick goodbye hug, Jasmine wheeled her carry-on toward the terminal. She wore a simple but professional navy blazer over a white blouse and dark jeans, nothing flashy that screamed wealth. Her natural hair was styled in a neat bun, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence her mother had instilled in her. At the security checkpoint, Jasmine noticed the pattern immediately. The TSA agent waved several white travelers through with cursory glances at their IDs and boarding passes. When Jasmine stepped forward, the agent scrutinized her Harvard student ID and driver's license as though searching for forgeries. "Purpose of your trip to San Francisco?" the agent asked, a question he hadn't posed to any previous travelers. "Science competition," Jasmine replied politely, having learned from her mother that keeping calm during these random checks was the unfortunate tax black excellence often paid. "You'll need to step aside for additional screening," the agent said, motioning to a female colleague. Jasmine complied without complaint, though she noted the time. Her flight would begin boarding in 40 minutes. The female agent patted her down thoroughly, then began methodically unpacking her carry-on, examining each item including her research materials. "What's this?" the agent asked, holding up a small circuit board that was part of Jasmine's demonstration model. "It's a custom microprocessor for my science project." "It's completely harmless," Jasmine explained, maintaining her composure despite the crawling sensation of familiar injustice beneath her skin. 20 minutes later, with her belongings haphazardly repacked and no apology for the delay, Jasmine hurried toward her gate. Her mother had booked her a first-class ticket, one of the few indulgences Alicia insisted upon for her daughter's comfort and safety when traveling alone. As she approached the gate, the boarding announcement for first-class passengers had just begun. Jasmine took a deep breath, straightened her blazer, and stepped forward, ready to board the flight that would take her toward her bright future. Little did she know that crossing this threshold would lead to an incident that would change not just her day, but would spark a national conversation about prejudice in the skies. "Boarding Group 1, first-class passengers may now board," announced the gate agent as Jasmine presented her boarding pass. The agent's eyebrows raised slightly, but she scanned the ticket and waved Jasmine through without comment. Stepping onto the plane, Jasmine was greeted by flight attendant Kimberly Watson, a blonde woman in her mid-40s with a smile that disappeared the moment she laid eyes on Jasmine. "You're in the wrong section, sweetheart," Kimberly said before even glancing at Jasmine's boarding pass. "General boarding is still a few minutes away." "I'm in first class," Jasmine replied calmly, extending her boarding pass. "Seat 2A." Kimberly took the boarding pass, examining it with visible skepticism. "Did someone give you this? These tickets are very expensive." Jasmine felt her cheeks warm but kept her voice steady. "No, ma'am. It's my ticket." With obvious reluctance, Kimberly handed back the boarding pass. "Very well. To your left." Jasmine made her way to her window seat in the second row. As she settled in, she noticed the sideways glances from other first-class passengers, mostly older white men in business attire and a few white women in designer clothes. No one else looked like her. The businessman assigned to seat 2B, Nathan Peterson, a silver-haired executive type in an expensive suit, approached and hesitated. "I believe you're in my seat," he said with an air of certainty. "I'm in 2A, Jasmine replied, showing him her boarding pass. Nathan's expression shifted from confusion to mild surprise. "Ah, I see. I'm in 2B then." He settled beside her, placing his briefcase under the seat in front of him. "First time in first class?" he asked with a condescending smile. "No," Jasmine answered truthfully, though she didn't elaborate. She opened a scientific journal on her tablet, hoping to review some material before takeoff. Minutes later, Kimberly returned, hovering over their row. "May I see your boarding pass again?" she asked Jasmine, though she hadn't made the same request of any other passenger. Jasmine produced it once more. Kimberly examined it, front and back, then disappeared briefly to the front galley. When she returned, another flight attendant was with her, both wearing concerned expressions. "There seems to be a problem with your ticket," Kimberly stated loudly enough that nearby passengers turned to look. "What problem?" Jasmine asked, conscious of the growing audience. "This ticket doesn't appear to be valid. We need to verify the purchase." Jasmine felt her heart rate increase but maintained her composure. "I can show you the confirmation email on my phone if that would help." "That won't be necessary," Kimberly dismissed. "We have reason to believe this ticket may have been obtained fraudulently." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Several passengers were now openly watching the interaction. "I didn't obtain anything fraudulently," Jasmine stated firmly. "My mother purchased this ticket legitimately." Nathan shifted uncomfortably beside her but then leaned toward Kimberly. "Perhaps we should maintain certain standards in the premium cabin," he suggested quietly, though not quietly enough. Kimberly nodded in agreement. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and move to the main cabin while we sort this out." "There's nothing to sort out," Jasmine insisted, pulling up the confirmation email on her phone. "Here's proof of purchase." Kimberly barely glanced at the screen. "Anyone can forward an email. For security reasons, I need to ask you to leave this section." By now, the confrontation had attracted the attention of everyone in first class. Jasmine felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes on her, most assuming she was in the wrong. "This is ridiculous," Jasmine said, her voice finally betraying a hint of emotion. "You're doing this because I'm black, aren't you?" A collective intake of breath swept through the cabin at her direct accusation. "That is completely inappropriate," Kimberly hissed. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the aircraft immediately for being disruptive." "I'm not being disruptive. I'm sitting in my assigned seat with a valid ticket," Kimberly signaled to her colleague. "If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have security remove you." Nathan cleared his throat. "Young lady, perhaps it's best to comply now and sort this out later. We're delaying departure for everyone." The blame shift was subtle but effective. Now Jasmine was positioned as the problem, inconveniencing everyone else with her disruption. When Jasmine remained seated, Kimberly touched her wrist communication device. "Security to the main cabin, please." Minutes later, 2 airport security officers appeared at the front of the plane. Kimberly pointed directly at Jasmine. "This passenger is refusing to comply with crew member instructions and needs to be removed." The humiliation was complete as Jasmine was forced to stand, gather her carry-on, and walk the gauntlet of the entire plane, past rows of curious and judgmental faces in both first class and the main cabin. As she moved down the aisle, she heard whispers. "These people always want what they haven't earned. Probably tried to use a fake ticket. Making everything about race these days." One of the security officers gripped her elbow firmly as they reached the exit door. Jasmine pulled her arm free. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice shaking not with fear but with suppressed rage. "I can walk on my own." As she stepped back into the jetway, Jasmine pulled out her phone and began rapidly texting. The security officers exchanged glances, assuming she was venting to friends. They had no idea she was messaging one of the most powerful women in the American tech industry, her mother. The fluorescent lights of the terminal cast harsh shadows across Jasmine's face as she stood surrounded by airport security. Officer James Bailey, a stocky man with a receding hairline and an air of bureaucratic indifference, flipped through her identification documents with a skeptical expression. "So you're saying the flight attendant removed you from first class despite having a valid ticket?" he asked, his tone making it clear he found her story dubious at best. "That's exactly what happened," Jasmine replied, maintaining her composure even as her stomach churned with humiliation and anger. She glanced at her phone, where her mother's last text glowed reassuringly. "I'm already at the airport for my meeting with Skystream Technologies. Stay where you are. I'm coming now." Officer Bailey sighed. "Look, miss, in my experience, these situations are usually just misunderstandings. Maybe you misread your boarding pass or—" "I didn't misread anything," Jasmine interrupted, her patience finally fraying. "My boarding pass clearly states seat 2A, first class. The flight attendant checked it multiple times and still decided I didn't belong there." The memory of similar incidents flashed through Jasmine's mind. The high school science fair where judges assumed her advanced AI project must have been completed with her father's help, not realizing her single mother was the tech genius in the family. The college tour at MIT where the guide directed questions about admission requirements to her white friend instead of her, the upscale boutique where the saleswoman followed her closely while ignoring white shoppers. "Even if what you're saying is true," Officer Bailey continued, "there's not much we can do. The flight crew has final authority over who flies." "Excuse me," a voice called out from behind them. A woman in her early 30s with copper-colored hair approached purposefully. "I was on that flight, and I saw everything. What happened to this young woman was blatant discrimination." Jasmine recognized her as a passenger who had been seated a few rows behind her in first class. "And you are?" Officer Bailey asked. "Tara Wilson, attorney with Goldstein and Partners," she replied, extending a business card. "I specialize in civil rights litigation, and what I witnessed on that plane was textbook discriminatory treatment." Officer Bailey's demeanor shifted slightly. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but, I have video," Tara interrupted, holding up her smartphone. "I started recording when I saw how the flight attendant was treating her, questioning her ticket repeatedly while not doing the same to any other passengers." A small crowd of curious onlookers had begun to gather at the periphery of the confrontation, several with phones raised, recording the aftermath of Jasmine's removal. "I've already contacted my firm's aviation law specialist," Tara continued. "Discriminatory removal from common carriers is specifically prohibited under federal law." Airline supervisor Carl Thompson arrived, his navy blue suit and company pin broadcasting his authority. His tight smile suggested he was already calculating the public relations implications of the situation. "I'm terribly sorry for any inconvenience," he began with practiced smoothness. Perhaps we can discuss this matter privately in our customer service lounge. This isn't about inconvenience, Tara countered. This young woman was publicly humiliated based on racial profiling. That's a very serious accusation, Thompson replied, his smile never wavering. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding that we can resolve amicably. The only misunderstanding, Jasmine said quietly but firmly, is the assumption that I didn't belong in first class because of how I look. Thompson's response was cut short by a commotion at the far end of the terminal. Heads turned as a group of people moved purposefully through the crowd, led by a commanding woman whose very presence seemed to part the sea of travelers. Officer Bailey frowned. What's going on over there? Jasmine straightened her posture, a small smile of relief crossing her lips for the first time since the ordeal began. That, she said with newfound confidence, is my mother. The crowd at the gate grew silent as Alicia Franklin approached, flanked by her executive assistant and a woman in a tailored suit carrying a leather portfolio that screamed, corporate attorney. Alicia's crisp charcoal suit and the quiet authority in her stride identified her as someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms long before she spoke a word. Thompson's practiced smile faltered as recognition dawned in his eyes. Few people in corporate America wouldn't recognize Alicia Franklin, whose journey from software engineer to tech CEO had been profiled in every major business publication from Fortune to Forbes. Jasmine, Alicia called, her voice carrying across the terminal. Are you all right? The dynamic in the terminal shifted instantly. Security officers straightened their postures. Carl Thompson's face paled several shades. And Jasmine, standing tall amidst the chaos she hadn't created, felt the burden of having to navigate this injustice alone lift from her shoulders. The turning point had arrived, and with it, the realization for everyone present that what had begun as another routine case of discrimination was about to become anything but routine. The terminal fell into a hushed silence as Alicia Franklin closed the distance between herself and her daughter. Her purposeful stride, designer heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor, commanded attention without effort. Behind her followed Jordan Hayes, her executive assistant who was already documenting everything on a tablet, and Stephanie Chen, Franklin Technologies' formidable chief legal counsel. Mom, Jasmine said, relief evident in her voice as they embraced. Alicia held her daughter at arm's length, examining her face. Are you okay? I'm fine, Jasmine assured her, though the slight tremble in her hand suggested otherwise. Alicia turned toward the airline representatives, her expression shifting from maternal concern to executive precision. The transformation was remarkable, shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes laser-focused. This was the woman who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and outmaneuvered tech giants. My name is Alicia Franklin, CEO of Franklin Technologies, she stated, her voice measured but resonant with authority. Someone is going to explain to me, right now, why my daughter was removed from her rightful seat on your aircraft. Carl Thompson's professional veneer cracked further. Ms. Franklin, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Alicia repeated, the words hanging in the air like ice crystals. Is that what you call racial discrimination at your airline? Kimberly Watson, who had been summoned from the aircraft by her supervisor, stood slightly behind Thompson, her earlier confidence evaporated. Her eyes widened in recognition of Alicia Franklin, the same woman whose face had graced the cover of Business Week's Most Influential Women in Tech issue just last month. Mrs. Franklin, Kimberly began, I assure you, race had nothing to do with MS. Franklin, Alicia corrected calmly. And I'd advise you not to finish that sentence without your union representative present, as you're on the verge of compounding your already precarious legal situation. The memory of her own journey flashed through Alicia's mind, the countless times she'd been mistaken for administrative staff in her early engineering career. The venture capitalist who had addressed all funding questions to her white male colleague despite her being the founder and lead developer, the executive who had expressed surprise at her articulate presentation, as though eloquence from a black woman was an anomaly. What thoughts are going through your mind right now? Would you have handled this situation differently if you were in Alicia's position? Comment number 1 if you believe Alicia is right to use her position and influence to address this injustice. Comment number 2 if you think she should let the airline handle it through official channels. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to see more stories of justice and accountability. How do you think the airline staff will react now that they realize who Jasmine's mother is? Let's continue. Officer Bailey, suddenly aware that this situation had escalated far beyond a routine passenger removal, adjusted his approach. Ms. Franklin, we're just trying to understand the sequence of events. Then allow me to assist, Tara Wilson interjected, stepping forward with her phone. I have video evidence of the discriminatory treatment your employee subjected this young woman to. A small crowd of passengers from the flight had gathered in the terminal, many having deplaned when they realized something significant was unfolding. Among them was Nathan Peterson, the businessman who had sat beside Jasmine. He hovered at the edge of the group, his expression a mixture of discomfort and calculation. Alicia's legal counsel, Stephanie Chen, was already reviewing the video on Tara's phone, her expression growing sterner with each passing second. Ms. Franklin, she said, looking up from the screen, we have more than enough here for a federal civil rights complaint, not to mention potential grounds for a civil lawsuit for public humiliation and emotional distress. The airline staff exchanged alarmed glances. In the distance, the unmistakable equipment of a local news crew appeared at the terminal entrance, drawn by social media alerts about the unfolding drama involving a major tech CEO. I'd like to speak with your CEO, Alicia stated, addressing Carl Thompson directly. Not a regional manager, not a vice president, Harold Bennett himself. Ms. Franklin, I'm not sure that's possible on such short notice, Thompson stammered. I shared a panel with Harold at the Global Business Forum last month, Alicia continued smoothly. I have his direct number. Would you prefer I call him, or will you? As Thompson retreated to make the call, Nathan Peterson finally approached, extending his hand toward Alicia with a practiced smile. Ms. Franklin, Nathan Peterson, Executive VP at Meridian Investments. I was seated next to your daughter on the flight. A most unfortunate misunderstanding. Perhaps I could be of assistance. Our firm is always looking for promising tech opportunities too, Mr. Peterson, Alicia interrupted, not taking his hand, my executive assistant has informed me of your comments during the incident. Maintaining certain standards in the premium cabin, I believe you said. Her gaze was unwavering. We at Franklin Technologies maintain certain standards too, standards of integrity and respect. I don't believe our companies would be a good fit. Nathan retreated, his networking attempt thoroughly rebuffed. Airport security, now realizing the gravity of the situation, had shifted from questioning Jasmine to providing a perimeter around the Franklin Group as media interest grew. Mom, Jasmine said quietly, my competition presentation is tomorrow morning. I can't miss it. Alicia squeezed her daughter's hand. You won't, sweetheart. I promise. As Carl Thompson returned, his face ashen, Alicia Franklin stood at the center of the terminal. A black woman whose journey through the tech world had prepared her for this moment of advocacy, not just for her daughter but for every person who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their humanity. The power dynamic had shifted completely. And as media cameras began to roll and social media accounts began to buzz with the unfolding story, it was clear that what had begun as one flight attendant's discriminatory action was about to become a national conversation about race, privilege, and accountability in America's skies. The airline's VIP lounge had been hastily cleared of other passengers, creating an impromptu crisis management center. Inside, Alicia Franklin sat poised at the head of the conference table, her posture relaxed yet commanding. Across from her, Carl Thompson dabbed perspiration from his forehead with a handkerchief while an airline attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Jasmine observed the scene from a nearby armchair where she was reviewing her presentation notes, determined not to let the day's events derail her competition preparation. Beside her, Tara Wilson was engaged in a hushed phone conversation with colleagues at her law firm about the incident's legal implications. Our preliminary research into your airline's customer complaint history reveals a disturbing pattern, Stephanie Chen stated, sliding a tablet across the table displaying a spreadsheet. 37 formal complaints alleging racial discrimination in the past 18 months alone, all quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. Carl Thompson's face tightened. Those records are confidential. Nothing is truly confidential in the digital age, Mr. Thompson, Alicia replied smoothly. Especially not when it forms a pattern of corporate negligence. Outside the lounge windows, they could see airline staff frantically preparing a different gate for the delayed flight's eventual departure, as social media reports about the incident continue to spread. #BlackGirlKickedOut was already trending locally. Jasmine's phone buzzed with a notification. A classmate had texted her a link to a Twitter post showing a grainy photo of her being escorted off the plane with the caption, "Watching racism in real time at ATL airport. Black teen with valid first-class ticket removed for not belonging, while flight attendant smirked." The post already had thousands of retweets. Jasmine set her phone down, momentarily overwhelmed. Her mother had always prepared her for the reality that as a young black woman, she would face obstacles based on prejudice. "It's not fair, but it's reality," Alicia had told her. "The question isn't whether it will happen, but how you'll respond when it does." Growing up as the daughter of a tech pioneer had given Jasmine unique privileges, the best schools, international travel, financial security, but it hadn't shielded her from racism. If anything, it had sometimes made the contrast more stark, the microaggressions more jarring in spaces where wealth was supposed to be the great equalizer but never quite was. A memory surfaced from when Jasmine was 12, watching her mother handle a similar situation at an upscale restaurant where they'd been seated near the kitchen despite having reservations for weeks. Alicia hadn't raised her voice or made a scene. Instead, she'd calmly asked for the manager, mentioned her friendship with the restaurant's investor, and watched as they were quickly reseated at the best table in the house. Afterward, in the car, Alicia had explained, "I used my privilege today because sometimes that's the most effective tool. But remember, most people who look like us don't have that option. That's why when we gain power, we have to use it not just for ourselves, but for systemic change." Now, watching her mother in action, Jasmine understood the lesson on a deeper level. This wasn't just about getting justice for one incident, it was about addressing the underlying culture that made such incidents commonplace. A commotion at the lounge entrance drew everyone's attention. Harold Bennett, the airline's CEO, had arrived, not via video conference as expected, but in person, having apparently taken a corporate jet from headquarters upon hearing who was involved in the discrimination complaint. "Alicia," he greeted with forced cordiality, extending his hand. "This is certainly not how I hoped our next meeting would occur." Alicia stood, accepting the handshake with professional courtesy. "Harold, I appreciate you coming personally. This suggests you understand the severity of the situation." Bennett, a tall man with silver hair and the weathered tan of someone who spent weekends on golf courses, nodded grimly. "I've been briefed on the incident. Please accept my personal apology to you and your daughter. We'll be conducting a thorough investigation, and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken." "An apology is a start," Alicia acknowledged, "but it's insufficient. This isn't an isolated incident, as your own complaint records demonstrate." In the corner, Kimberly Watson sat with her union representative, her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety as she realized her actions might have consequences beyond a reprimand. Tara Wilson ended her call and approached the main table. "My firm would be very interested in discussing those 37 previous complaints, Mr. Bennett. Class action cases involving pattern discrimination can be quite costly for corporations, both financially and reputationally." Bennett's professional smile tightened. "I'm sure we can find a reasonable resolution without escalating to litigation." "That depends entirely on your definition of reasonable," Alicia countered. "A gift certificate and frequent flyer miles won't suffice." Jasmine watched her mother navigate the corporate politics with masterful precision, thinking about how differently this situation would have unfolded if she had been just any black teenager without a powerful parent. How many others had suffered similar humiliations with no recourse? How many had simply accepted the injustice as the cost of existing in spaces not designed to welcome them? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from the science competition organizers, checking if she still planned to attend tomorrow given that situation they'd heard about. The news was spreading even faster than she'd realized. Outside the lounge, Nathan Peterson was giving an interview to a local news crew that had gathered in the terminal. Through the glass, Jasmine could see him gesturing emphatically, no doubt positioning himself as an ally rather than the complicit bystander he had been. Franklin Technologies currently has a corporate travel account with your airline valued at approximately $27 million annually, Jordan Hayes, Alicia's assistant, stated matter-of-factly, looking up from her tablet. We're in the process of expanding our international operations, which would potentially double that figure over the next fiscal year. The implication was clear without being stated outright, that account could very easily be moved to a competitor. Bennett cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss concrete steps moving forward. Alicia nodded. I believe that would be productive. And we should start with ensuring my daughter doesn't miss her competition presentation tomorrow morning in San Francisco because of your employees' actions. As the executives began to outline potential remedies, Jasmine reflected on the surreal contrast between her morning's anxieties about her presentation and the current situation. She had worried about explaining complex algorithms to judges, not becoming the center of a viral news story about racial discrimination. The deeper context of the day's events was becoming increasingly clear. What had happened to her was merely the visible symptom of a much more pervasive problem, one that affected countless travelers who didn't have CEO mothers to advocate for them when systems failed. As painful as the experience had been, perhaps it could serve a greater purpose if it forced real accountability and change. With that thought, she returned to her presentation notes with renewed determination. Tomorrow, she would still stand before the competition judges, representing not just her research but her resilience. The atmosphere in the VIP lounge shifted as Harold Bennett's team of executives arrived, each carrying tablets and folders of hastily gathered information. Among them was Diane Winters, the airline's chief diversity officer, whose expression suggested she recognized the potential career-defining nature of this crisis. We've prepared several options for immediate resolution, Bennett began, nodding to an assistant who distributed glossy folders to everyone at the table. Alicia didn't open hers immediately. Before we discuss compensation, I'd like to hear directly from Ms. Watson about her actions today. All eyes turned to Kimberly, who sat straighter in her chair beside her union representative. The flight attendant's complexion had paled considerably since her confident removal of Jasmine hours earlier. I was following standard procedure for ticket verification, Kimberly stated, her voice less assured than before. There was no racial component to my decision-making. Tara Wilson raised an eyebrow. Yet you didn't verify the tickets of any other first-class passengers, according to the video evidence and multiple witness statements we've collected. I had reason to believe, Kimberly began. What reason? Alicia interrupted sharply. What specific, non-racial reason did you have to believe my daughter didn't belong in first class? The silence that followed was damning. Bennett cleared his throat. We've prepared a comprehensive compensation package, including 10 first-class round-trip tickets anywhere we fly, Sky Elite status for both of you for life, and a donation in Jasmine's name to the charity of her choice. Stephanie Chen glanced at the offer document and gave a subtle headshake to Alicia. Harold, Alicia said, her tone conversational yet firm, do you know what message it sends when your response to racial discrimination is to offer material compensation rather than structural change? Bennett shifted uncomfortably. We're certainly open to discussing policy adjustments as well. Policy adjustments, Alicia repeated. Let's be more specific. What your airline needs is not just another sensitivity training video that employees will click through while checking their phones. You need a fundamental culture shift. Jasmine watched her mother work, recalling the countless times she'd seen Alicia transform boardroom resistance into productive collaboration. It was like watching a grandmaster play chess, always several moves ahead. Our first priority, Alicia continued, is ensuring Jasmine makes her competition tomorrow. After that, we can discuss the broader implications. Bennett nodded quickly. We're preparing a private jet to take her to San Francisco immediately. It should be ready within the hour. Jasmine's eyes widened slightly at this development. A private jet seemed an extreme response, though it reflected the airline's growing recognition of their vulnerability. Outside the lounge, the situation was escalating beyond the airline's control. Social media reports indicated that passengers from the flight were giving interviews in the terminal, many expressing outrage at how Jasmine had been treated. The hashtag Justice for Jasmine had begun trending nationally, with several civil rights organizations already issuing statements condemning the airline. Nathan Peterson had managed to position himself near the media scrum, attempting to insert himself into the narrative. I was sitting right next to her, he told a reporter loud enough for those in the lounge to hear through the glass. I tried to intervene when I saw the unfair treatment. Jordan Hayes, who had been monitoring the coverage on her tablet, showed Alicia a clip of Nathan's interview. Alicia's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened slightly. Mr. Bennett, she said, turning back to the CEO, your company has a systemic problem that extends beyond today's incident. The data we've reviewed indicates that black passengers are nearly 8 times more likely to be removed from your flights or denied boarding than white passengers. Diane Winters, the diversity officer, leaned forward. Ms. Franklin, if I may, those statistics don't account for contextual factors that, Ms. Winters, Stephanie Chen interrupted, we've adjusted for every standard contextual factor, including time of booking, method of payment, frequency of travel, and membership status. The disparity remains statistically significant at a 99% confidence interval. Winters fell silent, recognizing she was outmatched in this particular data analysis. Jasmine, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. This isn't just about me. What happens to passengers who don't have famous parents or viral videos? Do their complaints just become part of that spreadsheet of settled cases? Her question hung in the air, piercing through the corporate damage control strategies to the heart of the matter. Bennett turned to her with a practiced expression of concern. Young lady, I assure you we take all passenger complaints seriously. Then why, Jasmine asked, her voice steady despite her youth, does your company have the highest rate of discrimination complaints among major U.S. carriers according to Department of Transportation data? The executives exchanged surprised glances, clearly not expecting this level of preparedness from a teenager. I researched airline statistics for a school project last year, Jasmine explained, answering their unasked question. The data is publicly available. Alicia couldn't suppress a small smile of maternal pride before returning to her professional demeanor. Harold, here's what needs to happen. First, my daughter flies to San Francisco today on your private jet. Second, your airline implements a transparent anti-discrimination policy with clear consequences for violations. Third, you establish an independent review board to examine past complaints and provide appropriate remedies. Fourth, you commit to mandatory quarterly training for all customer-facing staff, developed in consultation with civil rights experts. That's a significant undertaking, Bennett hedged. So is rebuilding your company's reputation after today's news cycle, Alicia countered. Just then, Jordan Hayes approached with her tablet displaying a notification. Ms. Franklin, Franklin Technologies board members are requesting an emergency conference call regarding this situation. This development shifted the dynamic yet again. Now Bennett was witnessing firsthand how the incident was affecting Alicia's company as well. 1 hour, Alicia said to Bennett, standing up. We'll reconvene after I've spoken with my board. In the meantime, I suggest you calculate the potential impact of a boycott by not just Franklin Technologies but our entire industry network. She paused. The tech community is surprisingly unified when it comes to issues of discrimination. As Alicia stepped away to take the call, Jasmine found herself momentarily alone with the airline executives. Despite their seniority and her youth, the power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. These decision-makers now looked at her with a mixture of apprehension and respect, not because of who her mother was, but because her mistreatment had exposed vulnerabilities in their corporate culture that could no longer be ignored. Kimberly Watson avoided eye contact entirely, her career prospects likely diminishing with each trending social media post about the incident. For Jasmine, the corporate response was unfolding exactly as her mother had taught her about institutional racism. Initial denial, followed by minimization, then token gestures, and finally, when the pressure became unbearable, meaningful action. The question remained whether that action would be sustained once the media spotlight moved on. As she watched her mother pace near the window, speaking confidently with her board members, Jasmine realized that this incident, painful as it was, had given her a front-row seat to a master class in corporate accountability and the strategic use of privilege to fight systemic injustice. By early evening, what had begun as a personal humiliation for Jasmine had transformed into a national conversation. Airport terminals across the country featured news screens displaying the developing story, with the hashtag #JusticeForJasmine consistently trending in the top 5 topics nationwide. Inside a private conference room adjacent to the VIP lounge, Jasmine scrolled through her phone with a mixture of awe and apprehension at how quickly her experience had captured public attention. Messages of support flooded her social media accounts from strangers across the country, many sharing their own stories of discrimination during air travel. "It's overwhelming," she admitted to Tara Wilson, who had remained by her side throughout the ordeal. "I didn't expect this to become such a big story." "Discrimination stories resonate because they're so common," Tara explained gently. "Your experience is unfortunately relatable to millions of people. The difference is that yours might actually lead to change." Outside, a full-fledged media encampment had formed near the terminal entrance. National news networks had dispatched correspondents, their satellite trucks parked in designated areas of the airport grounds. Jasmine had already declined several interview requests, uncertain about stepping further into the spotlight. "You don't have to speak publicly if you're not comfortable," Alicia had assured her earlier. "Your privacy matters more than any PR opportunity." This support had relieved Jasmine, who worried primarily about her competition presentation the next day. While her experience today might make a difference in how airlines treated passengers of color, her climate prediction algorithm could potentially save lives in vulnerable communities, a mission she wasn't willing to sacrifice. Jordan Hayes entered the room with an update. "The private jet is ready whenever you are, Jasmine. The pilot says we can be in San Francisco in 4.5 hours, which puts us there by 9 p.m. Pacific time." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, gathering her presentation materials. The reality of flying on a private jet, a direct consequence of the discrimination she'd faced, struck her as a profound irony. Meanwhile, in the main VIP lounge, Alicia Franklin and Harold Bennett had resumed negotiations, now joined by the airline's entire executive leadership team and multiple legal representatives. The stakes had escalated dramatically in the past hour as major tech companies began issuing statements of support for Jasmine and Franklin Technologies. "Our latest social media analysis shows this incident has generated over 12 million impressions in the past 3 hours," reported the airline's communications director, her voice tense. Celebrity influencers with large followings have begun sharing the story, including several film stars and professional athletes. Bennett's expression had grown increasingly grave. "What's your assessment of potential financial impact?" he asked his CFO. "Preliminary projections suggest a 5 to 8% booking decrease if this continues unaddressed through the news cycle. Translated to revenue, that's approximately." "I get the picture," Bennett interrupted, turning back to Alicia. "Your proposed remedies are ambitious but not unreasonable given the circumstances." "We're prepared to make substantive commitments." Alicia nodded, but her expression remained firm. "Those commitments need to be public, transparent, and measurable, not just internal policy adjustments that fade once the attention dies down." As they continued hammering out details, former passengers from the flight had become impromptu witnesses, giving interviews in the terminal. Most expressed shock at Jasmine's treatment, though their accounts varied in important ways. The flight attendant was completely out of line, one business traveler told a reporter. The young woman showed her boarding pass multiple times and was still treated like she didn't belong. Others painted a more complex picture. There was definitely tension, but I couldn't hear everything that was said, an elderly passenger acknowledged. It did seem excessive to remove her from the plane, though. Nathan Peterson had positioned himself as a central character in the narrative, despite his actual role having been far from heroic. I tried to advocate for the young lady, he claimed to a CNN correspondent. I could see she was being treated unfairly. His interview was cut short when Tara Wilson approached the media scrum, tablet in hand. For accuracy's sake, she announced loudly enough for cameras to capture, "Here's the actual video showing Mr. Peterson suggesting that certain standards be maintained in first class while the young woman was being removed." The resulting footage, showing Nathan's complicity rather than advocacy, quickly began circulating alongside the original discrimination story, creating its own sub-narrative about performative allyship. Inside the conference room, Jasmine was preparing to depart for the private jet when her phone buzzed with a notification from the science competition organizers. The message expressed support for her after learning about the incident and offered to reschedule her presentation time if needed, a small accommodation that nonetheless brought tears to her eyes after the day's stress. As she gathered her belongings, Jasmine paused to look out the window at the gathered media and onlookers. The public dimension of what had happened to her carried both opportunity and responsibility. While she hadn't chosen to become a symbol in America's ongoing conversation about race, she recognized that her experience could potentially create meaningful change, if leveraged correctly. "Mom," she said when Alicia stepped in to check on her, "I've been thinking about what happens after this dies down in the news. What about all the people who face discrimination every day without cameras or powerful parents?" Alicia sat beside her daughter, pride evident in her expression. "That's exactly the right question to ask. One-time corporate apologies don't fix systemic problems. I want to do something more permanent," Jasmine continued. "Maybe start a foundation that helps people document and address discrimination in transportation. We could develop an app that makes it easier to file complaints and track responses." Alicia nodded thoughtfully. "That's brilliant, actually. Technology serving justice, right in line with our company values." As they discussed possibilities, Harold Bennett approached with a document in hand. "We've drafted a public statement addressing today's incident and outlining concrete steps for organizational change. I'd appreciate your review before we release it." The statement acknowledged the discriminatory treatment Jasmine had experienced, announced Kimberly Watson's suspension pending investigation, and detailed a comprehensive plan for anti-bias training and policy revision throughout the airline's operations. Most significantly, it announced the creation of an independent passenger advocacy office that would report directly to the board of directors rather than management, with authority to investigate complaints and recommend binding remedies. "It's a start," Alicia acknowledged after reviewing the document. "The independent review structure is particularly important." As final arrangements were made for Jasmine's departure to San Francisco, the media narrative continued evolving. What had begun as a story about one black teenager's humiliation had expanded into a broader examination of discrimination in the airline industry, corporate accountability in the age of social media, and the still uneven playing field of American society despite decades of civil rights progress. For Jasmine, standing at the intersection of privilege and prejudice, the public dimension of her experience reinforced what her mother had always taught her. That real change required both individual courage and systemic pressure, and that those with power had a responsibility to use it for those without. As she prepared to board the private jet, Jasmine made a decision. She would give one brief statement to the media before departing, not to center herself in the story, but to redirect attention to the broader issues her experience had highlighted. "I'm fortunate that my situation is being addressed," she told Jordan Hayes, who was coordinating with the airline's press team. But I want to make sure the conversation continues for all the passengers whose stories never go viral. The California sun cast long afternoon shadows across the San Francisco International Airport tarmac as the private jet carrying Jasmine Franklin touched down. After the turbulence of the day's events in Atlanta, the smooth landing felt symbolically significant. A transition from chaos to control. Waiting on the private aviation side of the terminal was a small delegation from the National Youth Science Competition, including Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the program director who had been following the unfolding story throughout the day. Jasmine, Dr. Montgomery greeted her warmly as she descended the aircraft steps. "We're all so impressed by your composure through this ordeal. If you need to reschedule your presentation slot." "Thank you, but that won't be necessary," Jasmine replied with quiet determination. "I've prepared too long for this opportunity." In the 17 hours since her removal from the commercial flight, Jasmine had experienced a crash course in media management, corporate negotiations, and the complex intersection of race, privilege, and power in America. Through it all, she had maintained focus on her original purpose: presenting her climate prediction algorithm that could help vulnerable communities prepare for environmental disasters. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, the resolution phase of the incident was proceeding with unprecedented speed. In a glass-walled conference room overlooking the main terminal, Alicia Franklin and Harold Bennett sat side by side at a hastily arranged press conference, flanked by their respective legal and communications teams. "Today, we announce a comprehensive agreement that addresses not just the unacceptable treatment of Jasmine Franklin, but the systemic issues it revealed," Bennett stated, cameras flashing as he spoke. "SkyStream Airlines acknowledges that racial bias affected our employees' actions, and we take full responsibility for that failure. The unusually direct admission, free from the corporate hedging that typically characterized such statements, reflected the extraordinary leverage Alicia had wielded in negotiations throughout the afternoon and evening. Moving forward," Bennett continued, "we are implementing immediate changes to our training, policies, and accountability structures." He outlined a series of concrete commitments: mandatory quarterly anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, an independent passenger advocacy office with direct reporting to the board, transparent tracking and publication of passenger removal statistics by demographic categories, and a comprehensive review of all discrimination complaints from the past 3 years, with appropriate remedies for affected passengers. When it was Alicia's turn to speak, she balanced accountability with forward-looking optimism. "What happened to my daughter today happens to countless passengers who don't have the resources or platform to demand justice. Our agreement ensures that SkyStream Airlines will become a leader in equitable treatment for all travelers, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, or appearance." The press conference concluded with the announcement of a newly established Transportation Equity Initiative, jointly funded by Franklin Technologies and SkyStream Airlines, dedicated to researching and addressing discrimination across all modes of public transportation. As questions from reporters began, Tara Wilson stood at the back of the room, watching the corporate machinery transform a discrimination incident into a public relations opportunity. Her cynicism was tempered, however, by the knowledge that the binding legal agreements underlying the public statements had real teeth, clauses, penalties, and oversight mechanisms that would ensure accountability long after the media spotlight faded. Her law firm would be handling the class action representation for past victims of discrimination by the airline, working to provide remedies ranging from financial compensation to formal apologies. The firm had already received over 200 inquiries from former passengers since news of the incident broke. In San Francisco, Jasmine settled into her hotel room, reviewing her presentation slides one last time before attempting to get some rest. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A video call from her mother. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Alicia asked, her face showing both concern and pride. "I'm okay," Jasmine assured her. "Just focusing on tomorrow's presentation." "How did the press conference go?" "Better than expected. Bennett seems genuinely committed to making changes, or at least smart enough to recognize he has no choice." Jasmine nodded. "And Kimberly Watson?" "Suspended pending investigation," though between us, her position is untenable. The union rep is already negotiating separation terms. They discussed the details of the agreement for a few minutes before Alicia changed the subject. I've been thinking about what you said, about using this platform to help others. The Transportation Equity Initiative will need a youth ambassador when you're ready. Jasmine smiled. I'd like that. After Harvard, maybe. After ending the call, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the day's extraordinary sequence of events. In the span of hours, she had experienced both the harsh reality of racial prejudice and the unusual privilege of seeing that prejudice promptly addressed, a contradictory experience that highlighted the complexity of being black in America, even with advantages many others lacked. Back in Atlanta, as the press conference concluded, Nathan Peterson attempted to approach Alicia, clearly hoping to salvage a networking opportunity from the situation. Ms. Franklin, I just wanted to express again how disappointed I was by today's unfortunate incident. If there's any way Meridian Investments could partner with your Transportation Equity Initiative, Mr. Peterson, Alicia interrupted coolly, my executive assistant will be happy to provide you with the contact information for our ethics committee. They're currently reviewing the video of your behavior during today's incident as part of an assessment of potential investment partners. Nathan blanched. I think there's been a misunderstanding about my role. No misunderstanding, Alicia assured him. The video is quite clear. Now if you'll excuse me. As she turned away, Jordan Hayes leaned in to whisper, the SEC investigator returned your call regarding Meridian's questionable trading practices. Alicia nodded. Schedule that for tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, Officer James Bailey, the airport security officer who had initially dismissed Jasmine's concerns, was attending the first session of newly mandated sensitivity training for all airport law enforcement personnel, a direct result of the day's events and subsequent agreements. As various participants in the day's drama dispersed, some transformed by the experience, others merely inconvenienced, the resolution phase continued to ripple outward. Social media posts about the incident had reached over 30 million views, airline industry publications were already analyzing the potential impact on corporate policies across carriers, and civil rights organizations were citing the case as an example of how documentation and publicity could create leverage for systemic change. For Jasmine, preparing to present her scientific research the next morning, the resolution wasn't just about corporate promises or policy changes. It was about reclaiming her narrative, transforming from a victim of discrimination to a catalyst for change while still pursuing her own dreams and ambitions. As she finally drifted towards sleep, Jasmine found herself thinking not about the humiliation she'd experienced or the corporate reckoning that followed, but about the climate algorithm she would present tomorrow, an innovation that could help communities that looked like hers prepare for environmental threats. That work, more than any airline policy change, would be her most meaningful resolution to the day's events. In that moment of clarity before sleep, Jasmine realized that true resolution wouldn't come from corporate promises or public apologies, but from the ongoing work of creating a more equitable world, work she was now even more committed to pursuing. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the San Francisco Fairmont Hotel hummed with anticipation as hundreds of attendees gathered for the Franklin Foundation's inaugural gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegantly dressed guests representing sectors ranging from technology and transportation to education and civil rights advocacy. At the center of it all stood Jasmine Franklin, now a freshman at Harvard University, confidently guiding donors through an interactive display of the climate prediction algorithm that had won first place at the National Youth Science Competition. The sophisticated AI system, now being implemented in vulnerable coastal communities across 3 continents, had transformed from a student project into a life-saving technology. The algorithm identifies microclimatic shifts that traditional models miss, Jasmine explained to an impressed group of tech executives. This gives communities an additional 26 to 48 hours of preparation time before extreme weather events. Nearby, Alicia Franklin moved seamlessly through the crowd, the embodiment of corporate leadership with purpose. The past 6 months had been transformative for both mother and daughter, as they channeled the energy from the discrimination incident into creating lasting change. The Franklin Transportation Equity Foundation, established with the initial $20 million joint funding from Franklin Technologies and Skystream Airlines, had already made significant strides. Their mobile app for reporting and tracking discrimination complaints across all transportation sectors had been downloaded over 2 million times, creating an unprecedented database of incidents that companies could no longer ignore. The power of data cannot be overstated, Alicia told a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who was covering the gala. When we quantify discrimination, companies can no longer dismiss incidents as isolated or anecdotal. Across the ballroom, Tara Wilson, now heading the Foundation's legal advocacy division after leaving her previous firm, was engaged in conversation with transportation industry executives about the Foundation's certification program. Companies that implemented comprehensive anti-bias measures and achieved measurable improvements in equitable treatment could earn the coveted Equity Excellence rating, a designation that was quickly becoming a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Skystream Airlines has made remarkable progress, Tara acknowledged to the group. Their passenger removal disparities have decreased by 78% in the past 2 quarters, and customer satisfaction scores among passengers of color have increased significantly. Harold Bennett, who had arrived earlier that evening as one of the Foundation's corporate partners, nodded in agreement. The incident with Jasmine was a painful but necessary wake-up call for our entire organization. The changes we've implemented aren't just cosmetic, they're fundamental to our operational culture now. The transformation of Skystream Airlines had indeed been substantial. Beyond the required policy changes, the company had voluntarily expanded its commitments, establishing new hiring practices that had increased diversity in leadership positions and creating a passenger advisory council that included representatives from various minority communities. Kimberly Watson, the flight attendant whose discriminatory actions had triggered the original incident, was no longer with the airline. After her suspension, the internal investigation had revealed a pattern of similar behavior in previous interactions with passengers of color. Rather than termination, however, the resolution had taken an unexpected turn. Ms. Watson actually reached out to me directly, Jasmine explained to a small group gathered around her display. After completing intensive bias awareness training, she asked if she could work with our foundation. She now helps train flight crews on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. Her personal experience makes the training particularly effective. This redemptive arc had been Jasmine's idea, a recognition that transformation required converting opposition into allyship rather than simply punishing past behavior. It reflected her growing sophistication in understanding how sustainable change occurred. The Foundation's impact extended beyond air travel. Their research team had developed industry-specific metrics for measuring equitable treatment in trains, buses, rideshare services, and cruise lines, creating accountability across the entire transportation ecosystem. Companies that had initially resisted scrutiny were now competing to demonstrate their commitment to equity. For Jasmine personally, the transformation had been equally profound. The shy, brilliant teenager who had once hesitated to draw attention to discrimination had developed into a poised advocate who balanced her scientific pursuits with social justice work. Her mentorship program for young black girls interested in STEM fields had already expanded to 12 cities, creating pathways for the next generation of innovators. The most meaningful change, she told her mother as they shared a quiet moment amid the gala's activities, is seeing how young girls like me are now documenting unfair treatment instead of just accepting it. They know they have resources and support. Alicia squeezed her daughter's hand, immensely proud of how Jasmine had transformed adversity into opportunity not just for herself, but for others. You've created something lasting from a moment that was meant to diminish you. That's true power. Across the room, Nathan Peterson was notably absent from the guest list. In an ironic twist of fate, the SEC investigation into Meridian Investments that Alicia had quietly encouraged had uncovered significant irregularities in the firm's practices. Nathan's subsequent resignation amid the scandal had been a footnote in financial news, but a reminder that accountability sometimes arrived through unexpected channels. As the evening progressed, Jasmine took the stage to deliver the gala's keynote address. Looking out at the assembled guests, corporate leaders, civil rights advocates, technology innovators, and transportation executives, she reflected on the journey from humiliation to transformation. 6 months ago, I was removed from an airplane because someone decided I didn't belong there, she began, her voice clear and confident. Today, we're all here because we believe in creating a world where everyone belongs everywhere, where dignity isn't determined by appearance, and where accountability isn't exceptional but expected. She outlined the foundation's achievements and future goals, emphasizing that true transformation required sustained commitment rather than reactive responses to public relations crises. Equity isn't achieved through a single policy change or training session, she noted. It's built through consistent, measurable actions that become part of organizational DNA. As Jasmine concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, she shared one final anecdote that symbolized the personal transformation she'd experienced. Last week, I boarded a Skystream flight from Boston to visit my mother, she told the audience. The same airline, but an entirely different experience. The flight attendant, a graduate of the training program our foundation helped develop, didn't see my presence in first class as unusual or suspicious. She simply welcomed me aboard with the same respect she showed every passenger. Jasmine paused, letting the significance of this simple dignity resonate. That moment wasn't just about one flight or one flight attendant. It represented the transformation of an entire system, a transformation that continues with each of you who commits to making equity not just an aspiration but a reality. As the gala continued into the evening, with commitments for additional funding and partnerships being secured, the broader implications of that single discriminatory incident 6 months earlier became clear. What had begun as one teenager's humiliation had catalyzed changes affecting millions of travelers. The transformation hadn't erased the reality of racism in America, but it had created new mechanisms for accountability and new pathways for progress. For Jasmine Franklin, standing confidently at the intersection of science and social justice, the journey had come full circle. The algorithm she had nearly missed presenting due to discrimination was now helping vulnerable communities around the world. The foundation born from her experience was creating systemic change across industries. And the young woman who had once been told she didn't belong was now defining belonging on her own terms. The transformation was ongoing, imperfect, and challenging, but undeniably real. And as Jasmine looked toward the future, she recognized that the most significant transformation had been within herself, from a passenger who experienced discrimination to a leader who inspired change. This story powerfully illustrates how discrimination persists even in spaces where wealth and status should be equalizers. Jasmine's experience reveals that racial bias often operates independently of class privilege, affecting people of color across all socioeconomic levels. However, it also demonstrates the impact of having resources and influence when confronting injustice. The most profound lesson lies in how Alicia and Jasmine transform the humiliating incident into systemic change, using their privilege to create accountability mechanisms that benefit everyone. They recognize that true justice isn't found in compensation or individual apologies, but in reimagining systems that prevent discrimination from happening in the first place. We also learn the importance of documentation and witness solidarity in fighting discrimination. Without Tara's video evidence and willingness to speak up, the airline might have dismissed Jasmine's experience as a misunderstanding rather than confronting the underlying bias. Finally, Jasmine's story teaches us that transformation requires both immediate accountability and long-term commitment. Momentary outrage may generate headlines, but lasting change demands sustained effort, measurable goals, and a willingness to convert opposition into allyship. What moments of discrimination have you witnessed or experienced, and did you speak up? Comment below and share your story. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories of overcoming injustice. Hit that share button to spread this important message to others who need to hear it. Thank you for watching, and remember that your voice matters in creating a more equitable world for everyone.